This is part of the culinary and pleasure revolution to help solve the supply and demand problem, create new jobs, and various other things, but I'm going to stick with that for now. So this particular playlist is sharing new uses for staple crops and new uses for rare edibles, as well as introducing those rare edibles. And the point of both of those two things is for the staple crops, there's often a lot of crops that just sit there unharvested, unused, when people could be eating them and using them because small farmers often can't compete with bigger farmers. And so creating new uses for some of those products that are sitting there gives them an extra competitive edge. And then with the rare edible crops, in addition to by introducing more wide knowledge of different kinds of rare edibles, it takes the weight off of the staple products that are highly in demand, especially during times in the pandemic when people freak out and stock up on and hoard things. Then sometimes there are shortages of stuff. So if there's more varieties of things to have, then that helps that. So, and if there are, again, new uses for products, not only does it make them more desirable, but it helps more small farmers get into the market. And a big part of the culinary revolution is also not for the two particular things I'm going to share right now, but I'm introducing a whole lot of herbs and vegetables and other protein and starch plants that can be easily grown, that are rare and highly desirable, so that small urban home farmers, even someone who has an apartment with low light and not even a balcony, can potentially either find a new income growing things and selling them to gourmet and health food stores and supermarkets that sell rare produce because they can make more money for small amounts of things, or simply create less stress on the supply and demand phenomenon and more plenitude of food products for people because they find out things that are both extremely pleasurable and inexpensive to grow, that they can grow in their homes. Anyways, so now the focus of this video. So the first thing I'm going to talk about are BARUKA nuts. So nuts are something that people definitely often want to store and hoard, and it's always great to have another variety of things. So BARUKA nuts, also called baru nuts, look like an acorn. They taste somewhat like a peanut, but they're crunchy as opposed to buttery, and they're slightly less sweet. And I think that they're usually sold, or at least I've never been able to find them in the U.S. sold raw. They're usually sold slightly roasted, which is a common practice when selling nuts because it helps them stay shelf stable longer. It keeps them from going rancid, which nuts can happen with nuts. But I think that BARUKA nuts would be far superior if they were sold raw. And but of course, because not a lot of people know about BARUKA nuts, and you can find them usually in a vacuum packed bag in a health food store or specialty gourmet store, or some of the grocery stores that have some of the more exotic stuff. But anyways, because they aren't widely known, they're sold that way, and you may not know that some foods are drying and some are hydrating. Some oils are more drying, some are more hydrating. Almonds, for instance, are considered a drying oil. But BARUKA nuts are a little bit more dry than almonds. And yet, if they were sold raw, then they're more hydrating, more balanced. And I think they're already a very tasty nut, but they would be incredibly popular if they were raw. But they need to be in demand for the people, the farms that sell them, to sell them raw. So the next thing is fresh maple sap. I always thought that drinking fresh maple sap, which is the watery substance that comes out of a maple tree that is boiled down for many hours until it becomes the thick, sticky thing that is maple syrup. And you may not know that when so much heat for so long is applied to a edible crop, it loses most of its vitamins, although, it still retains most of its minerals. So I still think maple syrup is a good product. But in terms of fresh maple sap, it has all of those vitamins and nutrients. And what's interesting is I looked during the pandemic, lo and behold, and all the innovativeness to create new income and stuff, a couple of people finally packaging maple sap. One of them selling them in the kind of Tetra packs, like the sort of cartons that you get soy milk in, another person in a glass bottle. But I think that fresh maple sap as a beverage would be far more both enjoyable and more enlivening fresh. And if it's fresh, then generally it's less expensive to package, and fresh products are usually more desirable locally. So there's less competition because people are going to want just, desire more local farmers to provide them. So I haven't tried the shelf staple product, but that's my feeling. Now, fresh maple sap, while I think that it's an enjoyable thing, it may be more of an unusual taste for more people. More of the things that I would be sharing are all around crowd pleasers, but I just wanted to give some examples today, and I also think it's kind of a whimsical and interesting thing to have fresh maple sap. I think there's something enlivening in products that are come from trees that are not necessarily a sweet fruit or something. And another little thing to know about maple sap is that because it's not maple syrup, it's not super sweet like maple syrup. Many things that have some stray amount of sweetness in them, if they're boiled down, will boil down to nothing but the sugar. But in their original form, they often are not actually very similar to a sugary thing. So fresh maple sap is not really a sugary thing. Anyways, so those are a couple of examples. I think one more note that I'll say about BARUKA nuts, a couple more notes about BARUKA nuts. If you do go out and find some BARUKA nuts to enjoy, I myself freeze them so I can store them longer, but that of course makes them drier. And just as a note, one of the things eventually I'll be talking about on one of my videos is about how to be able to be the master of your bodies, to keep it in a balance that, some foods are wetter, some foods are drier, make your body cooler, wetter, colder, whatever. And so it's, important to be in touch with your body and notice how the things that you eat affect it. So, people who have dehydration problems and generally would want to be eating more hydrating foods. And people who maybe tend to be a little more wet, then they like to have drier foods. So anyways, that's my little sample of this particular list. Hope you enjoy.